Now, woohoo! Hello and welcome to the parking lot. I feel like I should have like a pew 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 sound effect there, but
I was making the finger guns if it makes
I saw that, and
yeah,
that's what made me think about that. That voice you hear is our other Marine leader, Mr. John Fink. Hello, John.
howdy howdy.
How's your week been?
Pretty good. Just got back from the barber college. If you can't see, I am freshly shorn.
I have to go get my hair cut tomorrow in preparation for a 2 hour long dread interlocking session, which is going to be so fun.
That's
Which basically means my Saturday night includes a massive headache. And we are joined by the man who will not be having a dread appointment tomorrow, I am sure,
what?
the clean shaven Mr. John Brewer. How are you today, sir?
I am doing well. I was going to ask you, does my hair look okay?
It looks like my hair used to before I decided, like, I guess 3 years ago now, that I wanted dreads.
Yeah, I don't think I can pull that off like you can there, Nico.
It to each their own. It is a huge time investment, especially to have clean and neat dreadlocks that do not smell. It is a time investment, and it's monetary.
Oh,
Um,
you cut out
sorry,
there a little bit, Nico. What were you saying?
I said it is not cheap. I have to get my hair redone at least once a month, and it takes about 2.5 hours of somebody sitting there with a crochet hook, yanking my hair through knots in order to get it to tighten up and look neat.
Oh, wow. That
Yeah,
sounds complicated and painful. And
it is, but the I will say, and I've said this before on LinkedIn, getting dreads has been phenomenal for my body dysmorphia.
mm,
I used to really hate looking at myself in pictures or on video at all, because I never looked how I thought I looked. And getting the dreads so that, like, and normally I'm wearing them down unless I'm on camera, but having the dreads so like I see the hair like in my face sometimes like really helps me to self-identify when I'm looking at myself.
that makes sense.
So it's a odd thing, but it's really helped. And I can't keep my hair really neat. It's just going to do its own thing. I can keep it as neat as possible,
Mhm.
but at the end of the day, it's just kind of there.
John, tell us your hair story. Did you how long have you been completely shorn?
It's as long as I can remember. That's how long it's been. I joke and tell that the ex-wife got half of it and the other half just fell out. So it's you have your dreads there, Nico. I've got great source material with this, buddy. In,
Yeah.
in, in fact, the first time I had it shaved was actually at a barber shop, and it was gone. I wasn't going to do the comb over thing. That wasn't my thing, and I wasn't going to walk around with what I call old man hair, where it's just like
Mm,
around. Wasn't
sure.
going to do that. So I had the barber shave it, and there was a guy sitting at the right beside the door as I was getting ready to walk out, and I looked at him and I said, "Man, make sure you tip your barber." And his eyes got so big it freaked him out. So
Oh,
it's
bravo!
it's an extra 5 minutes of sleep every day for me, so I'm pretty happy about it.
Sure. Well, I've gone a long time without a haircut, but I found out, and this was all kind of put in motion a long time ago, so it's all prepaid and done, said for, and everything. But I'm gonna go to Mardi Gras and be on a float in the parade in New Orleans, and I have to be wearing a big mask. like a full mask around me. And so I had, bushy hair and beard and everything. And so I was like, I can't do both. So I just went down to the barber college because I've been, tighten my belt a little bit. And so this is what $7 will get you. So $7 in 2 hours with an instructor sitting over this guy's shoulder going, yeah, I will. But it was fun. It was a good experience. And so,
Yeah, I used to do the barber college thing before I got my dreads, and now it because I have the dreads just at the top, so like I normally keep the sides bald.
mm,
Getting somebody who can cut close to the dreads without actually cutting off at the root of the dreads is really hard.
it takes some scientific knowledge and some
Yeah,
good practice. Yeah.
but enough about hair.
Yes. Hair's not stuck on a shipping container in the ocean right now. I guess it could be.
No, I wanted to get a line on what you do, John, because you work for CKE Restaurants in the transportation department. So is CKE like a wholesaler for restaurants, or is that like a restaurant chain?
We actually own two brands. We own Hardee's and we own Carl's Jr. on the West Coast.
Oh, okay.
So we own the brands, both franchises and company stores. I'm the director of logistics and distribution for the United States. It's about roughly 3,000 restaurants total. We run, let me see, what is it, 15, 19 distribution centers with a partner, two partners. We deliver to those restaurants pretty much at least once a week, if not twice a week. So it's a lot of moving parts, and we have about 200 to 250 vendors that we use for all items from pickles and packaging all the way to the burger patties and the buns. Uh, Anything that is consumable within a restaurant, I'm having it delivered.
That Okay, so that gets me into a really, really intricate part of of the supply chain, and realizing that food supply chain works completely different than dry freight. When you're sourcing for these restaurants, or you're like if you're ordering burgers, is it you're only ordering burgers from like one specific vendor, or are you ordering from like a bunch of different vendors and then putting them in the same box for shipping out to the stores? How does that work?
It's pre-pandemic. It was by geography. We had some vendor, obviously we would have some vendors closer to the DCs than others. During the pandemic, when you saw all the supply chain shortages and the grocery store shelves being empty, we increased our vendor count to multi-source so that we could have a constant supply. If, in other words, if one of them went down due to labor challenges, we could always, lean on the other ones. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We do that not only with burgers and stuff, but just really across the board. So it's kind of helped us be able to serve our customers even during these crazy times that last 24 months have been.
I feel like especially when you look at the changes, like for instance, a lot of our restaurants in the area have stopped using the plastic straws and started going to like paper straws. But like you see, even like in our area, it's stores in Northern Virginia are mostly like paper straws, whereas where I live in like middle and like Southern Virginia, you have a lot more like plastic straw restaurants. Like, do you run into that where like you have to source like different specific items for different geographic areas?
Yes, we especially out west in California, they do have foam ban products. We're starting to see that slowly. California was one of the first ones, but we're starting to see that kind of roll out. I think Maui is now doing it. We've got some other places where you just can't use foam products, and then now they're even looking at the single-use items. So getting those, we have to source specific needs for specific municipalities.
Do you think this transition to the extra flexibility with the pandemic is going to give you I don't know, better practice at doing that to respond to the needs of customers more in the future, or do you think that's going to sort of scatter everything?
I think anytime that you can diversify your supply chain,
Hmm.
it makes you more agile.
Right.
Now, does that also affect your profit margins? Because I mean, I'm
Right.
assuming if you're sourcing from multiple vendors, like it throws,
What's the
your
upper
P
limit?
and L kind of into relief because, or kind of into chaos because you might be paying this price at this vendor versus this price at this vendor. Like, how do you control that, like from a cost perspective?
It would probably be a lot more along the lines of leverage, just the magnitude of what we're buying. We typically will do an RFP on that, and pick like a. It's kind of like your carriers. You do it. You bid out your freight, and you have a primary, secondary, tertiary carrier. It would be something similar to that.
What are some of the signs that you and I'm not saying that you run into this now, but what are some signs that you look for, some red flags? You're like, hey, maybe we are spreading ourselves too diversified, too thin on this one specific commodity.
Um, Honestly, that's really
Or is
more
there
a
no such thing?
purchasing group. You don't want 20 different vendors. Okay, just like I don't, I don't really want 20 different brokers because they're all pulling from the same pool,
Right.
basically. But you got to find that sweet spot where I would say somewhere between, I would say no more than five on some of the major items, and then probably closer to three on the majority of them.
Makes sense.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I guess it has. Have you seen like kind of a cost savings from dealing with more vendors as well? Like, has that entered into the picture, or is it really kind of because of the RFP process? Is it kind of close price wise, or have you found like areas where you've gotten better business processes out of it?
I think what you're seeing here, especially with the inflation rates right now, and food inflation is not immune to it. I think the multi-vendor solution is probably more service oriented at this point, more capacity, more sustainability oriented. Not to say that you don't focus on cost because you do, but in my line of work, the two in distribution and logistics, the two major things are cost and service, and they are constantly uh, jockeying for that number one position. You either get low cost and bad service, or you get good service and high cost. So you really got a balancing act there. And I think right now, just the way the economy is and what we're seeing out there, it's probably focused more on service capacity and sustainability.
What are some of the hallmarks of good service that you look for from your end?
Just on from a logistics standpoint or a distributor standpoint, just following through on what you've been hired to do. That's obviously a no brainer. I personally
Not
I,
every.
per- I personally look for transparency. I look for integrity, because it's a partnership. And it's I was actually on another podcast a while back, and we were talking about bringing on a new carrier onto into your organization, and how do you pick the right one, right?
Right.
So I told them, I said, look, I said, these companies that have hired me over the years, and I've been in the industry 27 years, um, and about 15 of that has been in corporate America. So, when these companies hire me, they're hiring my skill set, they're hiring my experience, they're hiring my knowledge, and they're expecting an ROI. So, when I go into these places, I want to be the go-to guy. I want to be the expert. You hired the expert. I'm the expert. I'm fixing to perform for you, and you're fixing to get an ROI on this business. And I said, the last thing in the world I need is to have the chief supply chain officer second guessing me because I made a bad hire on a carrier.
So what does your vetting process look like then? Like what do you think that you bring for a vetting process that allows you to kind of sniff out if somebody's good or not?
I start with the relationships.
Very good.
But I'm going to push the relationship. I even go so far as we obviously in this day and time it's a little bit more difficult, but I believe in breaking bread with people. It's the most simplest human way to build a relationship, and if you can do that, then number one, I like to eat. Um, so
Right.
that dovetails right into my mo there. But you build those relationships and you listen and you know you just those are you make those things kind of long. You want them to be long term. So just kind of to tell you my style. If I leave company A and I go to company B, well, I can guarantee you the guys that I've had at company A that I've had long standing relationships with, they're going to be the first ones to get the phone call because the honeymoon period's over. They know my expectations. They know that I want to take care of them if they take care of me, and I don't have to guess. And they know that if they screw something up and they come to me, number one, tell me, and number two, have a solution in hand, and I'll partner with you. And if as a shipper, because shippers are not innocent either, as a shipper, if you come to me and say, "Hey, look, John, you're holding our trucks up for 8 hours a day. We got to do something about it,"
Mhm.
then I'm going to work on my side of the fence to drive that cost down by lowering those hours. So it's a two-way street. You can't just take. You've got to give, and that's exactly what we're doing right now. Is we're trying to help our distribution partners reduce their operating costs by just doing some simple, common sense, basic stuff.
And we hear a lot, about the supply chain, like disruptions and stuff like that. Part of it is ocean freight, part of it is pandemic and whatnot. But we hear about like meat and dairy and like you have the avocado craze where it's like oh, we've got 2 weeks worth of avocados and although an interesting story that popped out of that I do want to take a minute. Taco Bell, of all companies, announced that they don't have to worry about the avocado shortage because of how they source their guacamole. And I'm like,
That scares me.
Yeah, what does that mean
uh,
exactly?
can you can you not be vague on that one? Because I mean, look, I don't eat guacamole anyway because it just
Why?
but but
It's delicious.
if unless your
It's a
guacamole
magical.
doesn't actually have real avocados in it, like how are you like just not having an
Well,
avocado patty?
I'm assuming it's kind of like when you go to the supermarket and you look and there's peanut butter and there's peanut butter spread and you look at the ingredients. Peanut butter spread has sugar in it. Peanut butter does not. It's probably the same thing where they're saying it's guacamole spread or guacamole sauce. And so they've got, like one guacamole that's been sitting in a sad fridge that goes into like a 50-gallon vat and that qualifies. There's always tricky ways to relabel things. I've been, as somebody that's been on the holistic and the food industry and all that stuff, there's all this specific nomenclature that they use to be able to be like, yeah, it's close.
So they're using a pasteurized processed guacamole food, is what you're saying?
I am. Well, and also if they, when they can, they will harvest a lot of avocados. I mean, because I live in Southern California. There are certain times of the year that you can drive in Fallbrook and get a 25-pound bag of avocados for $5, just on the side of the road. I mean, they've got avocados coming out of their ears. So if you can, harvest them at the right time and preserve them and seal them in these little, plastic packets, they're never going to go bad for like a good year, and then you can just kind of right onto a taco or whatever. Sorry
Hmm,
about that onomatopoeia.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
But the question I was trying to get into, what is the weirdest product that you've had a supply chain shortage on? Like
Yes.
something that people aren't like talking about.
We're dying for what?
um, it's been all the pretty much the basic stuff. I don't recall anything just off the wall.
Mhm.
Um, right now it's packaging and portion control cups, the little sauce cups you get like from
Oh,
Chick-fil-A and stuff like that.
sure.
It's those that are just really challenging, and what's driving that, and what has been driving that, along with the packaging, is a lot of your we call ourselves QSRs. A lot of your QSRs, when during the pandemic, um, shut the dining rooms down. because of COVID, and they ran out of the drive-throughs. Well, guess what? You got to have cups and straws and lids and bags and boxes.
Sure.
And portion control cups of ketchup and mustard and what have you. And you need more of it because you're pushing all your business. What used to be dining room and drive-through is now just drive-through.
Right.
So there's a huge pent-up demand for it. Our stuff, the way we do it, we were probably 80-85% drive-through pre-pandemic. So we really fared well coming through that. But it's these other chains who did have a significant dining room business, and now you're coming out of COVID, and they're releasing the dropping the mask mandates, and everybody's going back to the work. You still have the labor challenges. There is there's an Arby's in the city I live in, and their dining room is closed, not because of some COVID mandate, but because they don't have the labor to man the dining room. So they're just running drive-through. So you've got a lot more demand coming out of your drive-throughs, and that's eating all this up. Plus, a good portion of the packaging comes from overseas. And you hear Long Beach and LA and all these other ports, and they're all just backed up 7 ways to Sunday. So now they're just sitting out there on the water. So it's a perfect storm.
Yikes.
Oh, by the way, you mentioned ships sitting out in the water.
Yes.
Did you? Yes, I know, John, and I really thank you for sending me this story.
You thought it was
Have
made up.
you seen the story about the Felicity Ace?
Is it the one that's on fire that has the Volkswagen and the Porsches? Yeah,
Yes,
I read about that.
John sent me that last night or this morning. I think I woke up to it and I'm like, this has got to be fake. Like, I'm really gonna feel bad for going like, wow, you got punked, John. But no, so it's just up. So the story for people who haven't heard about it is there's this transport cargo ship in the water right now in the Atlantic, and it caught fire, so the entire crew just bounced off the ship. And so now, by maritime law, apparently it's salvage. So whoever goes to it can just take whatever they want. And I'm like, unless this ship sinks, I'm just picturing like every salvage captain out there is going to be like, okay, I'm going to go get me a Porsche off this ship.
Right. I do have to pat myself on the back because I somewhat predicted this on the parking lot a few episodes past, where there were going to be large shipments that were just kind of lost in the shuffle because they were unable to be delivered in time. And there is going to be this whole secondary industry of stuff that people just can't get their hands on because it's either out on the water or it's just can't hit that window of delivery within the port over and over again.
Right.
It's gonna be somewhat piracy, somewhat gray industry. I don't know. There's gonna be something that comes from that.
Well, you had Peloton having trouble getting their bikes in.
Oh,
Big container getting story out of there, and they were air freighting Peloton bikes. And I'm like, you start air freighting this stuff, man. The cash register just starts ringing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's just causing sticker shock everywhere. My cousin works for a car dealership, and he started posting like pictures of the surcharges that are going on top of car prices. It's like, how do you surcharge like 100% of the price of the car? Like, who's buying cars right now?
People got a lot of crypto. I don't know.
I bought mine when the Fed dropped the interest rates.
Gotcha.
Right,
That's what I bought my house.
Right at the beginning of COVID, when the dealerships were really, really hurting, I went out and carpe diem, buddy. I went out and bought a new SUV, and then when the Fed dropped the interest rate, I refied the house. So carpe diem.
Yeah, I bought my car during COVID as well, and I remember it was before like the vaccines and everything like that. So I literally I walked into the dealership, said, "This is what I'm looking for, and if you have it, great. If you don't have it, I'll just walk out." And I told the salesperson that I, had already submitted like my financial information online, and I was like, I'm gonna stand outside and I'm gonna smoke. Come and get me if you have anything. And like it was the first time I didn't even test drive my car. It was just I want a black or blue Honda CRV with Android Auto. Like you either have it or you don't.
Mm-hmm.
But they also gave me an amazing trade-in on my car that was just, had started to drop its transmission when I pulled into the dealership.
Oh
I had a problem getting up the hill to the dealership and was like, oh, that's not good.
man. My
Uh,
current car is a 13-year-old two-door hatchback, tiny, tiny little thing, and I got it, yeah, 13 years ago, off the insurance check from the previous car when I was rear-ended on the freeway. Stopped in a line of cars getting off the freeway, and I was hit by somebody at full speed.
Ooh.
So I took that and turned that into the down payment, and that little thing's been going ever since. So,
I just imagine you because you're so huge. I just
oh,
imagine you having
talk
to
about
have like a.
we didn't talk about this to John. John, I'm 6'10",
Holy mackerel.
and I wear a size 21 shoe, so I'm a giant. It doesn't show up on camera, but yeah. So,
Yeah,
Yes.
I don't see how you fit in a car like a two door.
yeah, it's no, it's honestly it's the shape of the console because my car is smaller than like my brother's car. He drives a Honda Fit, and it's just the shape of how the front console is. Some cars I can fit in, some ones I can't. I can drive a smart car. The shape of the console fits me, but
Hmm.
yeah, not.
Yeah, I don't share your problem. I'm like I'm like 5'8".
You know what,
I'm
enjoy.
like 5'3", so I got you all beat.
You guys enjoy it. Enjoy being able to ride on a plane and being able to walk into a store and have the clothes that fit you already in there. That's
and,
my.
and have your feet dangle off the bar stool at the bar.
Oh yeah. Um,
I really love bars that have the bar stools with like the step up thing because
yeah.
that's where I put my feet to stop from looking like a small child.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I just rest my foot up there every once in a while. It's like, kind of do the little cowboy, like, hey, kind of thing. That's all I do.
I just imagined you. You said cowboy, but I imagine you in a Buzz Lightyear outfit, and now I want to see that Photoshop.
You know what? I'm okay with that. I'm not going to say no to that.
I have been watching Toy Story with my family. Well, not with my family. I've been watching Toy Story by myself in the bed with my wife at night, and she is not into Toy Story at all.
What are you doing this to her for then?
Because I love Toy Story. Like I cry at the end of Toy Story 3.
I've never seen it. Never seen it. I heard it's sad. It's too sad. I don't want to.
Dude, it is
No, I don't want
really
sad.
sad.
I
But
don't like
it,
these movies that like fish the sadness out of you. I don't like that.
it I love the Toy Story movies because they're actually not for kids. Like when you watch Toy Story as an adult, it's a completely different movie.
I know. That's why I don't.
Toy Story 4, for instance, was really like a story about retirement and figuring out like when it's time to retire. And it's like that just goes completely over kids' heads who are just like, ooh, look, Forky, which, great character anyway, but you know,
I like just trying to figure out who the actors are that are doing the voices without reading, and then I check the credits at the end to make sure I was right.
Yes.
so the my wife is really into The Incredibles
Mm.
and Young Sheldon.
Oh,
And the guy who does the voice for Robert Parr is Nemo's boyfriend on.
Craig T. Nelson.
Yes, Craig T. Nelson. He's amazing, but because like he doesn't actually do a real voice for Mr. Incredible, like I'm watching Young Sheldon and it's like that's Mr. Incredible dating Nemo.
Yeah. He also did a sitcom several years ago called Coach.
Coach, I loved that
Really good
show.
sitcom. Yeah, I liked it.
Loved that show.
and his assistant coach is now the voice of Patrick Starr. Speaking of voices, Dauber
I did not know that, but that makes absolute sense.
is Patrick Starr.
He sounds like now that I'm thinking about exactly. Now that I'm thinking about Patrick Star, I'm like, holy crap, it was him.
Yeah, right. Isn't that amazing?
That is wow. I did not even know that. I just thought they found some oaf to do it. And
No.
evidently they did.
Well, yeah, he's a professional oaf.
He gets paid to be an oaf.
That's right, professional goofball. That's dare to dream, right?
See, I fell in love with young Sheldon because of Annie Potts.
Oh, she's
Oh
fantastic.
yeah. I liked her in Designing Women too.
Mm-hmm.
So she was also, by the way, Bo Peep in Toy Story.
She was the receptionist in Ghostbusters.
Yes, that's
Yes,
right.
which
Yeah.
is where I fell in love with her.
Yep.
But I always get her mixed up, thinking that she was in this really horrible B movie called Tank Girl.
I've always wanted to see that. I never did.
Oh, it is one of my like dirty pleasures of movies, but it starred Lori Petty, and I always get her and Annie Potts mixed up. I don't know why. They don't look alike. It's not anything like that. It's just they have about the same voice. So like I always get the two mixed up, but you have to watch Tank Girl. It is such a early 90s just B movie. It's even got like it's just watch it.
All right.
You have to. Have you ever seen it, John?
I have not. But
Oh.
you're mentioning B movies. I'm sitting there thinking about Maximum Overdrive. So
I have not seen Maximum Overdrive.
I'm a huge AC/DC fan from way back when, and they did the soundtrack. It was
Nice.
who made who was the soundtrack for Maximum Overdrive.
Now,
That
see,
sounds good.
you mentioned like really horrible B movies. Have either of you ever seen Johnny Mnemonic?
I've heard the name of it, but I have not seen it.
I know of it. Never saw it.
Oh, it's a Keanu Reeves movie.
Yeah, that before or after Matrix though?
Before, way before.
That's right.
Oh, it was
Like some bootleg information inside his head or something. Isn't that what?
yes.
Yes,
So
that's right.
he
It's
plays
pieces.
a digital courier, but the couriers keep the information that they're carrying in their head in like memory banks, and his starts to leak inside his head. So
Now I remember. Yeah, it's been a
to get
while.
the memories out, and they have to memory jack him, and like he has to work through like losing memories in his head, and like it's amazing. It is Keanu Reeves probably doing his best Nicolas Cage impression ever.
That's
He
amazing.
has moments where he's like freaking out and he's like throwing himself across the room. It is an over actor's paradise, and it even has Ice-T in it as like or no, I'm flashing. Is it Johnny Mnemonic or Tank Girl that had Ice-T in it? I'm conflating the two movies now.
We don't have the Ralph report. Please hold.
No, we don't. Oh no. Okay, yeah, it was Johnny Mnemonic that had that in it.
Nice.
Oh no, it was Tank Girl. Yeah, T Saint. He plays T Saint. So in Tank Girl, it's about like a company stealing water. So like in order to find like the water, they have to go to these like half man, half dog people that are run by Ice-T.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there's this whole scene where Lori Petty takes a sand shower for no reason.
Like you do. Well, I guess if there's water is the the limited commodity. What else are you gonna do to get clean?
But back to transportation. Sorry, we took a
Well, speaking of that, actually,
really
like
turn.
shipping. Well, speaking of that, like shipping water, though, like how much of that is changing now that water is becoming a tougher commodity, and has any of that been changing over the past 10 years for you, John? Or
I don't deal with water. I mean, we deal with some bottled
like
designing.
but
Yeah, bottled designing, but that's it.
So when you talk about like the food supply chain, like has your has there been any changes like with tech stacks and stuff like that in order to address COVID that you think are going to better the business long term?
That's a really good question. I don't think so much on the dry side. I think we've seen some improvements on the cold storage side, with a lot more AI, a lot more tech uh, within that vertical. So that's I think we're seeing that. I think right now your biggest challenge out there from a distribution standpoint is going to be capacity. There's a ton of M&A that has gone on in the last several years, and activity. And right now, the I think Prologis is one of the largest DC real estate companies out there, and the rates, the rent rates, the lease rates are just going through the roof, and they're short on warehouse space. So you take an Amazon who's trying to get, Amazon's trying to get like next day and second day prime. They're buying up a bunch of warehouse space close to their customers so they can pull that off. I mean, you can't ship from California to New York and get it there in one day unless you fly it. So that's you're starting to see that. It's just everybody's just scratching for what's out there, and there's just not enough out there.
And you have like I would figure that the problems at the port, especially as they go on longer and longer, is also encroaching on a lot of that warehouse space because they have to store this crap somewhere.
Yeah, they're pulling it out of the port and putting it into DCs, and that's how they're kind of getting the container volume to go down. But to your point, it's just like when Biden opened up the port, they asked the ports to run 24/7. Well, that's all well, great and wonderful. But if you don't have drivers and tractors and chassis and containers and warehouses to put the stuff, running a port 24/7 is not the answer. So
Yeah,
it's a lot more complex than some people seem to think.
yeah. When I think it was on Freight Waves when that happened, and it was like what you don't understand is just saying that the port stays open 24 hours. The port doesn't do anything unless there's infrastructure to move it. So you can't just tell the trains that they have to run 24 hours. You can't tell these like carriers that they have to run 24 hours. Like you can't just snap your finger and it's like, oh, this will open up the port. No, what you're really doing is you're at the best, what you're doing is you're filling up every single inch of storage on the port in order to get stuff off the port, but then it's just sitting in there for the morning when all the infrastructure to move it off the port opens up.
Now, what about what I'm seeing on the news where there are these intermediary offloading locations now that they're using empty train yards? Is that working, or is that a thing that they're just?
But even that requires a service called hot shotting, which we've talked about before
Sure.
with I think it was TJ Knudsen. But you have to have somebody who can hot shot that stuff from the port to those like offsite storage locations. And really, what you also have to do is you have to be able to reuse or repurpose that space for like port logistics. It's not like they just had these open rail yards and you can move stuff in here. It's They have to make the agreements in order to reuse that space that was in some areas it's classified for this, so you can't just use it for that. Insurance regulations and stuff like that. Like there's so much that goes into it that nobody really thinks about, that there is no one magic wand to wave. Everybody has to get up to everybody has to be agile at the exact same time.
Exactly.
Do you think that's sort of the next frontier is basically like making a living managing the snarls at the ports?
I mean, it's been a job forever, and it's just that.
But to a greater degree now, I would say, like a company that could specialize in just that.
My problem is I think that a lot of companies are thinking how do we get through this shit show short term?
Mhm.
And they aren't putting in place like lasting changes. It's as soon, well, as soon as, but when the problems at the port kind of calm down, I think they're going to want to go back to kind of the old business as usual, and not really understanding that that's probably not going to work.
I don't think they're going to be able to get back to that exact point, and I'll tell you why. Every even with like driver wages right now, driver wages are going through the roof. I mean, you're not going to be able to go back and get that driver for $20,000 less in a year or 2 years or whatever, because it sets the next plateau. See, for a long time, drivers, in my personal opinion, have been underpaid for the work they do. I mean, it's a thankless job. It's long hours. You're away from your family, eating Lord knows what, having to stay at, just ungodly. I mean, the truck parking and everything else. And one of the things that this whole pandemic has highlighted, and I'm just using just one small piece. I'm using one of the basic building blocks of supply chain as an example, because to Nico's point, it's a whole lot more complex, and there's a whole lot more people in the kitchen than just drivers. But drivers are a key element, and you're not going to be able to go back to that. But what people wanted cheap stuff. They wanted, they didn't want to pay the extra money, because if you start paying driver wages and you start paying, even the warehouse labor is going up. Even in my world, the restaurant labor prices are going up. Everything's going up. You got to pay for it somewhere. So to sit back and think, hey, we're going to go back to the way it was, even at its basic element, it's not going to happen.
And
It's
a thing that people don't, I think a lot of people don't take into account is that whenever wages go up in place A, it also pushes up wages in other markets.
that's right.
So, as truck driver pay goes up, you have other like driver sources that are being depleted because people are switching to, like class 8 driving. You have, especially if you look at the relationship between like Uber drivers, especially like Uber Freight, and drivers for Amazon or drivers for Walmart. You have the private drivers versus like the carrier drivers, the traditional carrier drivers, and owner operators, and it brings up prices across the board. But then you also have to look at, well, now the driver is making more than the office person, or it sends prices up everywhere, and that's where you get like this historic inflation. I'm wondering if, because I do agree, and I've said it on this podcast numerous times. Drivers have been dicked over and underpaid for years,
Exactly.
but the up in driver pay is going to also raise the pay for driver managers and recruiters, because recruiters have to work harder to get drivers into companies, especially companies with a bad rap. It raises up prices across the entire industry, and the rates that you're paying are going to reflect that inflation.
Right.
The carrier is going to pass it off to shippers, obviously, and then shippers have to pass it off to their customers. So is this, I'm starting to wonder, with a lot of these, pay rates and pay raises going across the board. You say that, oh, it's not a worker shortage, it's a pay shortage, and blah blah blah, and people are arguing that, oh, take the CEO pay. No, nobody's going to do that. It's just not going to happen. Just stop being dumb. But is this really just inflation, or is it kind of like a market correction where you know the wages have to go up, so prices have to go up?
hoping that's the case. Because I mean, it's going to have to happen eventually. It's going to head that way at some point. It's just how messy it's going to be as it gets.
But then don't we get into like a vicious circle where the inflation causes cost of living to go up, so then the minimum salary to not be in poverty is also going to go up. Like,
Well, the whole thing is that you try and have the two of those go up incrementally in small amounts next to each other instead of having one go boing really high up and then the other one try and catch up.
Yeah, but they typically don't move like that. I was actually there was a an infographic on LinkedIn I was looking at right before the show, and it was showing inflation in percent inflation year over year change versus percent salary year over year change, and it went like way back from by month from like 2014, and it's like I mean it's just crazy.
Yeah.
And especially like December of last year, it's like wages are here and inflation's like way up here. It's just shot right past it. So it just doesn't move like that. Everything's kind of knee jerk.
I mean, my wife's got the same issue. She works in hospitality. They've had just, up and down, like crazy record setting highs, like for the entire history of a hotel. And then, then a ghost town right back and forth on either side of it. It's just been, everybody. And that's the thing, like everybody's having to have a greater degree of flexibility in that way.
Yeah, I'm starting to really be worried about the effect of COVID on the transportation industry, and the sustainability of this type of new map for travel lanes and distribution centers and blah blah blah, like all like that map changing across the country, and how a lot of that isn't going to go back to normal.
Well, I think that's a big flaw of a lot of these businesses is that they have the back to normal idea as their goal.
Yeah.
Instead of let's see what this evolves into, they're like, oh, if we could just get back to X amount of years ago or X amount of destruction ago or whatever. I think it's unrealistic to think about that, and I think it shows in a lot of businesses that think that way.
Well, I think you're going to see, and this comes from having a history in this industry. I've seen a lot of things, obviously, and obviously the pandemic has been the worst, hands down. But take fuel. Fuel went through the roof several years ago. You start to see a lot of different innovations, and that really comes from the supply chain group, the logistics folks, the distribution folks, the transportation folks. Fuel went through the roof. You started seeing skirts on trailers. You started seeing double wide trailer tires. You started seeing auxiliary power units stuck to the back of cabs to keep the idling down. So there's some innovation that's going to come to that. And I think that innovation is what is needed to bridge that huge gap between cost of living and cost of goods, basically. And I think you're going to see that again. I think time and time again, I watched this industry think outside the box. They sit here and, they would, Lowe's and Home Depot and Walmart are right now leasing their own container ships. And they asked one of the people of one of these organizations, how did you come up with that? And they said, well, it started out as a joke in the boardroom, in the board meeting. It was a joke. When we get our own ship, and next thing you know, they're getting their own ship. And I got to thinking about that. I was like, well, what? How is that working? Because you still got to go through the port of Long Beach. But what they're doing is the ships they're leasing are smaller ships, and they can get it into the inland ports, and they get in pretty much anywhere, and they can bypass Long Beach, and they can bypass the eastern seaboard. I mean, they can come up through Houston or wherever, or Mobile, and get in there, and with these smaller ships. So actually, what started out as a joke in a board meeting actually came to fruition, and that's because you have that innovation, you have that entrepreneurial spirit out here. It takes, you may get supply chain down for a little bit, but it's getting right back up, and it's going to be stronger than it was when you took it down. And let's face it. I mean, think about it. How seamless has supply chain been up until the pandemic? Did you really question why there was toilet paper on the shelf at the grocery store every time you bought it, regardless of how much you bought? No. It took a pandemic to pull the green curtain back and to show all these men and women who bust their ass on a weekly, monthly, daily basis just so you can have toilet paper on the shelf every time you go to the store. We were the silent majority. We do this day in and day out. I mean, to this day, my family still doesn't understand what I do, and it took something just global to just say, hey. And then all of a sudden, everybody starts saying supply chain this and supply chain that. It becomes a buzzword, and I'm like, I've been doing this for 27 years, and you guys are just now figuring out what a supply chain is? Are you kidding me?
Well, it's like when I spent 7 years at Skybits, and I would tell people I support the trucking industry, and they're like, "The fuck does that mean?" It's like, do you know the sheer amount of industry, like professional personnel, support the trucking industry? Like Skybits, still build themselves as a trailer tracking company. They really aren't. They're a fleet data company. And you talk about like those innovations with like when the gas prices were so high. That's one of the times that a lot of companies started worrying about empty mileage. Just because of the difference in the fuel consumption in an 18-wheeler. Whether it's just truck by itself or truck and empty. And looking at like cold chain, cold chain can't do that the same way that dry chain does.
Right.
Because especially since like I think they still have to have like a temperature readout from the hold every 2 minutes as long as it's loaded, or you have to jettison the load or something like that.
Yeah. The reefer unit produces a log. And that's outside of the temp tails that you can put in the pallets.
Yeah, it's just the amount of regulations, especially in cold chain, are just ridiculous. And I really wonder, and I guess I could ask you, like, did you see like an increase in loads that you had to like deny during COVID because of either improper logging or delays in it being on the reefer and like the reefer running out of power or something?
I don't think we saw much of a change. Typically, the vendors and the distributors we use run a pretty tight show. I can tell you right now, no vendor wants to pay for a whole load of burgers because it's not cheap, or a whole load of bacon because it's not cheap. So they're going to monitor that very heavily. Where you get into some challenges is going to be your reefer LTL, because those doors on the back of that trailer are constantly being open and closed because it's a multi-stop run. So you have to kind of watch that. But like I said, the unit itself, the reefer unit itself does have a log, and you can have that downloaded. And then we use temp tails. I think it's anything over 100 miles away from the distribution center. So we're checking all that. Our QA is pretty extensive on that. And then you're receiving that into a cold dock at the distributor. That's usually about 35 degrees, somewhere in there, 35, 40 degrees at the most. So it's very, we're super sensitive to it because it's food and it's obviously important. So it's we keep a pretty tight handle on it. But the challenge we run into, and a lot of people run into this, is if you have to expedite refrigerated stuff, like say you want to try to find something other than an 18-wheeler to move it, it gets challenging. I mean, if you ever wanted to make any money, grab an Amazon van and slap a reefer unit on top of it, and your tires will never get cold. I promise you that.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, you get those cargo sprinter vans with like 2 to 4 pallets worth of space. If you can get that thing down to freezing, your tires will never get cold. and you can pretty much name your price. Right now, refrigerated expedited is about 4 times the cost of dry.
Wow.
I never thought of the fact that I really don't see smaller refrigerated vehicles.
Yep.
4 times the cost of dry, but then you're also putting in more for paying for the refrigeration, and so there's a little bit that comes out of that, right?
Well, you're going to obviously
Not 4 times.
you're going to consume more fuel because your unit's going to run off of fuel and your truck's going to run off of fuel.
Right.
But once you put the unit in, I mean, it's you got a little bit of maintenance, but I don't think it's 4 times.
Yeah. Wow.
I think it's sheer capacity is the reason why they're getting what they're asking.
Yeah, and you have we were talking about it on Trey Griggs's damn it, I was just on the show. Word on the Street podcast. And drivers just demanding like these really high rates, especially for expedited, and it's like the carriers have no choice but to pay it right now.
And the shippers as well.
Well, yeah, I guess that also kind of throws a wrench into the plan. Like how are you notified? Like if your carrier has to have this driver pay increase or whatever. Like how does that get, or I guess when does that get translated to you?
It could be at different times. I mean, it depends on what you're doing. If you're going to the spot market, then it's going to be communicated right there at the transaction. You know that. If you're dealing with more of a contractual setting, whether it be 6 months, that's about as long as we can get a contract for. The carrier will come back and say, "Hey, I gotta have a rate increase because the market went up." One of the things I personally have done, and this is just me being me, is I've had carriers come to us and say, "Hey, we've got to take a rate increase on this lane," and I started asking questions. I started going, "Okay." I literally told this young lady, and she is extremely sharp. I told her, I said, "Look, I want you to go back to the drawing board, and I want you to tell me what's driving your cost up. Is it the market volatility, or is it are we setting you at the origin too long? Are we setting you at the destination too long? What is it? What's causing the problem? Because I want to reduce the cost, not raise the rate." And usually when I tell somebody to do that, they grumble and then they walk off because they don't want to do it. It's a pain in the butt. She came back with a whole page, single space, whole page.
Bravo.
And we that's just how sharp she is. Okay. And we went through this.
That's somebody who knows their business.
And we started putting things in place. We established what I call rules of engagement. And we put in here, okay, distributor, you're going to do X, Y, and Z. Okay. And that's going to drive, then we're going to build KPIs into this. How long, what's the dwell time at your facility? I want to be able to see that on a monthly basis. So we brought all these things in play, and we set up, we streamlined communication efforts. We streamlined appointment setting efforts, all this extra, there was no capital expense. There was some labor expense because you had to implement this stuff. But we completely improved the whole situation and took the cost out of the system for her and her carriers and didn't take a rate increase.
Now, do you also see? I when you have cases like that, do you then employ that same rules of engagement across your entire network, or is that more for that carrier only?
It's typically tied to an origin point. Now, if it works, let me explain. Okay, I have frozen redistribution warehouses and I have dry redistribution warehouses, and they operate a little differently than your quote distribution center. Okay, so I implemented it on the frozen side, on the redistribution side, and right now we're kind of in the beta test. We're kind of watching it, see what it does. We're looking at KPIs. If I see success in that, then I'm going to roll it to my dry. Now, that process may not be meaningful to a regular distributor, and you may have to augment that to fit. But we're even working with these guys. I mean, this is, these types of conversations I had when I started very early in my career, when it used to be a partnership and it wasn't us versus them kind of deal. And now we're finally, because of the pandemic and inflation and everything else, we're having to circle back and basically reinvent the wheel. So I'm doing exactly what I did 20 some odd years ago now, where we're partnering with our carriers and we're figuring out how to improve their margins by reducing their cost by not doing stupid, idiotic things as a shipper.
Yeah,
Smart.
I guess that would be a positive, a net positive of having to deal with this, all this turmoil is you do have to really, if you're being smart about it, you have to make a lot better and a lot more mutually beneficial agreements.
Well, see, I tell people this. I tell them an RFP is a temporary solution to a permanent problem. So if you can think outside the box and figure out how to drive cost out of a system, that could be changing from over the road truckload to rail. That could be, it could be a lot of different things. And if you can pull cost out of it, then you have that long-term partnership. You have that relationship because the carrier, the broker, the shipper, they know you're looking out for their bottom line just like they are, and they're looking out for yours just like you are. So you have more eyes on the bottom line from different sides of the desk, and it's more of a partnership because you're not take. It's give and take, and you're working through the problems together. And 99.9% of them are just common sense. You just look at a process. I mean, I'm a guy from Mississippi. I'm a redneck from Mississippi. That's what I tell people because that's where I am from. And if I can figure it out, I'm kind of thinking pretty much anybody should be able to figure it out. And that's one thing that's kind of left the building here is common sense and being able to sit down and look at a process and trim out the fat without negatively impacting the parties involved.
I think anybody who's been in the transportation industry for more than like 30 days will understand that the transportation industry is a historically change averse industry.
I agree with that.
So the fact that you're, able to make these new relationships and, really push these new processes and procedures across a transportation company is admirable.
It falls to your relationships and your partnerships because you're exactly right. If you've got a partner out there that doesn't want to change, and I'll say that's probably more on the shipper side than the carrier broker side. If you've got a partner out there who just wants to keep doing, keep holding the truck 6-8 hours and just say, hey, I'm not worried about it, you're exactly right. But I've got, the carriers and the brokers and the distributors that I use, I build those long-standing relationships and it's mutual. And they know that if there's a problem, if we're causing them heartburn or something, they have an open door with me. They can come talk to me and they say, here's my problem. And then together we work on it and we try to fix it and figure it out. Because we're a whole lot better off working as a team of people than we are as individuals working against each other. So I'd rather have a team than an adversary or, an us versus them situation. That doesn't benefit anybody. Everybody loses.
Yeah, it just that to me is the biggest mark of professional integrity is understanding that in any type of relationship where you have a vendor or a carrier or a supplier or anything like that, like your success should be mutual. So if I am doing better as a business, I should pass that along, and every vendor who reports to me should be doing better as a business. If they're having problems, requesting rate hikes and stuff like that, if we can work together to figure out, as you said, some people just go away and grumble, because they don't feel like doing the legwork. Or, some people are like, they'll send you a list of, this is why we need a rate hike. And then you can, really look at your processes and go, okay, well, hey, redoing these processes on our end might save us money, on top of, not getting the rate hike.
Right. Yeah, it's anybody that I've ever had that would meet me halfway, we were able to move the mountains. And it wasn't really hard, and it didn't really cost a lot of capex or anything like that. It was just, let's do this smarter. And that's exactly, I've done that for 27 years. That's what I bank my success on. That's why I am where I'm at today, is because of those relationships with those strong partnerships with those people. I told them I was as good as my word. They was as good as theirs. We were transparent. We made mistakes. We admitted those mistakes. We learned from them. But at the end of the time, I mean, we would literally just sit down and just, lay something on the table and just figure it out. And, whatever it was, it didn't matter. And you just kept taking each puzzle as it came, and you just started putting it together. And once the picture materialized, then you solved it and moved on. And those relationships are strong. Like I said, if you're watching somebody's back and they're watching your back, it's strong. And they're gonna go to hell and back for you, and you're gonna go to hell and back for them. And that's a very powerful thing.
Absolutely. And I just this is one of the few shows where I've had to keep an eye on the time, because you're such an easy person to talk to that I could literally do this all night. But I am going to cut it here. Thank you so much, John Brewer.
Yeah.
It's the pleasure's been all mine, Nico. I really enjoyed finally getting to talk to you. I've got a lot of respect for you, both personally and professionally, and it's just nice to hear your voice and be able to have a conversation with you, man. I've enjoyed it. I really have.
It's been a joy. I love taking these interviews with people that, I really haven't talked to personally, or, I didn't, right before the show, I finally looked back and said, what does he actually say he does,
Yeah.
So I love this long form, what do you do in the industry and for the industry? And your story has just, especially after years of dealing with people who are like, if I could, do my business on paper logs and, hand-to-hand contracts, I still would, hearing somebody who's really embraced and made this agility as part of your mantra in the industry is really, really amazing.
You gotta, in my line of work, I always use the mantra, moving target's not easily hit. And since there's usually one on my back, I move very quickly and I move a lot.
Smart. Very smart.
Oh, that's my analogy of the week now.
There you go. One quick story, and I'll jump off, and you can cut it off if you want to. So, my nephew is a young lad. I think he's in high school now, or junior high. And when he found out that I was working for Hardee's, and I was still able to travel to Aruba, he came up with his grand plan that he was going to go flip burgers at Hardee's and take vacation time in Aruba. And my sister had to sit him down and said, well, your uncle doesn't flip burgers. But he had this master plan. I'm going to go work for Hardee's flipping burgers and go to Aruba. It's
like some manager of a...
Like, if I could do that, man, shoot you.
So my son is 15, and hearing how, because we're starting to have these conversations with him about, what do you actually want to do when you get out of high school and stuff like that. And I realize that he has no concept of what different people actually make. He's talking about, having a family and having kids and living in his own apartment or his own house, while working at McDonald's. And I'm like, oh, tell me more. I'm thinking of that old episode of The Cosby Show where Theo is talking about what he's going to do after high school, and Cliff gives him Monopoly money, and he's taking away the Monopoly money for each thing as he's going down.
Yeah, that was funny as hell.
I just I flash back to that in my head, and I'm like, oh, we're gonna have to talk.
Yeah, it's like I said, my family still to this day doesn't know what I do. So
Yeah.
But
maybe,
you know what? You support your family. They don't have to know.
yeah, I
In
just
a different way.
the lights stay on and it's warm in the winter and cold in the summer and there's food in the fridge. So yeah,
Well, thank
keep,
you.
keeps me off the streets and out of trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to get off the streets and out of trouble. But thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
This has been the
You have a
parking
good,
lot. What a joy to talk to you. Y'all have a great day.
have a good weekend, guys.
See ya.